Senator Paul, good to see you. I want to play for you a clip of President Biden the other night at the State of the Union and get you to react.
I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion. I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade.
Senator, that's $2 trillion that he's cut. Sounds pretty fiscally responsible. I follow you on Twitter. It doesn't seem that these numbers are adding up. And I know he introduced his budget yesterday. So what do you think of the president's math and his budget?
Are you sure that clip wasn't from Saturday Night Live? It looks like a joke to me because, no, really, if we're talking about the debt, there's the deficit and the debt. If we're talking about the debt, it's gone up $6-some-odd trillion in the last 3 years under Biden. So the debt is not being reduced. The debt is actually accelerating. The accumulation of debt is at an historic high. The only reason he can play games with the numbers is that during COVID, it was extraordinarily high. So it's come down from the levels of COVID, but it's still what most people declare to be an urgency or an emergency. The Federal Reserve Chairman 2 weeks ago said it was urgent that we deal with it. Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase also said it's an emergency. We need to do something about it. Nassim Taleb, an economist and writer who wrote The Black Swan, saying this. A lot of people really are alarmed at the accumulation of debt. And when he says things like, oh, it's under control and he's reducing the deficit, you heard laughter, you heard clapping from the Democrat, and you heard laughter from the Republicans. So it's just not believable. The debt is spiraling out of control, and it is a real problem, but he's not doing anything to fix it.
So the debt's about $34.5 trillion, $102,000 per person. But the debt, as you point out, is driven by the deficit every year that we rack up. If you ask the people at the Partisan Foundation, 82% of American voters say they want the president and Congress to spend more time addressing the debt, and 80% say that their level of concern has increased over the past few years. I think part of that is because we are seeing interest payments on the debt start to exceed what we're spending on our national defense. How concerned are you about what deficit, what interest payments and other things are doing to crowd out what I would argue is necessary defense spending?
Well, the interest rates have doubled. So we're up at about $800 billion in interest, and military spending is about $850 billion. So they're almost equivalent. And the predictions are that interest will exceed military, but it also will exceed what we spend on Medicare. So this is a big problem. For years and years, though, both parties have been guilty of allowing the debt to rise. When George Bush was president, it went from 5 to 10 trillion, but the interest rates went from 5% to 2.5%. And everybody's like, oh, it's free. The interest rate's half as much. But suppressing the interest rates led to the housing bust in 2007, 2008. So there are problems you get from this. And this is where we are now. Now we're up to, so we were at 10 trillion at the end of George W. Bush. We're now at 34 trillion. But both parties are guilty of this. The Republicans, I think, need to understand we can't have unlimited military spending. And the Democrats need to understand we can't have unlimited welfare spending. Right now, the compromise is the opposite. So I'm very disappointed in Speaker Johnson and the Republicans in the House that voted for this. 6,000 earmarks. And it's going to lead to a deficit of 1.5 trillion. Same thing in the Senate. The only way it passes the Senate is with all Democrats and 15 big government Republicans. So this is a real problem. And this is Republicans not sticking together, Republicans not being hardcore enough. And essentially the power of the purse has been abdicated. Speaker Johnson's thrown in the towel, and he's basically doing no better than what McCarthy was doing. In fact, this deal is worse than McCarthy's debt deal because the spending caps were exceeded. And so in the end, we're going to be on pace to a $1.5 trillion deficit. I voted no on it. I'm against the earmarks. I'm against the spending. And we need more courage from other Republicans.
You know, when Newt Gingrich was running to take back the House in 1993, 94, he used to carry around an ice bucket. And he would say at campaign stops, this ice bucket represents the ice that's delivered to members' offices every morning. Now, obviously, they all have refrigerators and ice makers in their offices now, but they didn't in whatever the 1800s. Those patronage jobs continued. And Newt's point was, this is an example of the waste that exists in Washington. And I will root out this waste because I value your hard-earned tax dollars. I've asked this of Kevin McCarthy when he rolled out the Commitment to America. Why aren't we at least going after the low-hanging fruit? Why aren't we? I never hear. I know you put out a report every year. Your background was with supporting taxpayers in Kentucky. Like, where is that old school Republican spirit of rooting out government waste, of endless of bad spending? It's almost like people are like, it's too much now. It's only a few million here and a couple billion there. I don't get the sense that Republicans even want to get rid of the low-hanging fruit.
Well, I'll give you an example. A lot of the waste comes from the National Science Foundation. William Proxmire was a conservative Democrat back when there used to be conservative Democrats. He used to do the Golden Fleece Award.
Yep.
And he said one of his favorites was for a $25,000 study to study whether sunfish were more aggressive when they drank tequila or when they drank gin. So they fed gin and tequila to sunfish to see how aggressive they were and see if one was worse than the other. And the National Science Foundation, I've been complaining about it for years, but you know what Republicans did about a year ago? Republicans and Democrats, the big government Republicans, they doubled the size of the National Science Foundation. So virtually all the worst of the worst studies, the shrimp on treadmill, the Japanese quail on cocaine to see if they're more sexually promiscuous on cocaine, that's coming from the National Science Foundation. Ridiculous stuff like that, but it wouldn't happen without Republicans. So if you watch the Senate Republicans, there's somewhere between 15 and 20 conservatives on a good day, maybe 25, but there's 20 to 25 who are big government Republicans who think, like Dick Cheney, that deficits don't matter and they just don't care and they vote for all this stuff. Or they say, we have to go after China, so we're going to subsidize the chips industry. Do you realize companies like NVIDIA are trillion-dollar companies? I'm all for them. They sell something good, they make money. I'm all for people making money. But why would we give trillion-dollar companies subsidies? You know, it's just ridiculous. But in doing so, they said, we have to subsidize the National Science Foundation. That's how we're going to have research that combats with China. Well, that's socialized study of science, and that's what the Chinese do. We're going to emulate the Chinese and defeat the Chinese by acting like the Chinese. Terrible idea, but the waste goes on and on and on.
As somebody who believes in smaller government, as you do, and you've championed, should I lose hope? I mean, if there's 15 of you, and I can probably name 14 of them off the top of my head, is all hope lost, or is there a way forward, or how do we regain our footing I mean, look at that poll from Partisan. 82% of voters say they want the president and Congress to spend more time addressing debt. I get it, not sexy, and no one comes home and says, you reelect me, I cut the deficit. But what do we need to do to reclaim that mantle and get more people that expose this like you are?
Get involved in the Republican primary. There are no Democrats that care about the deficit. So if you're going to vote for them, you don't care about the deficit either. Among the Republicans, everyone goes home and says they care about the deficit. Everybody says they're for limited constitutional government and balanced budgets, but they're not. Look at their voting records. Last week we voted, and about 15 to 20 Republicans voted for 6,000 earmarks. You know, the earmarks include one of the earmarks was for $1 million for a sex club in Philadelphia having group sex in a public place. That was one of the earmarks. Now they got embarrassed in the end and they removed it, but it was millions of dollars of bike paths that should be funded locally, boardwalks in New Jersey, all kinds of things that are really local projects and shouldn't be in there. This is what the earmarks. The Republicans voted to ban earmarks. We were against earmarks for almost a decade. Now they've come back. But unless voters punish these people for voting for earmarks and get rid of them in the next election and put forward primary opponents, they'll keep doing it. But I think very few people know how people voted. So one thing you guys could do is put up a list of who voted for the earmarks last week. We're going to have another vote next week. There'll probably be another 6,000 earmarks and more deficit spending. Put up who votes for these on the Republican side and let the Republicans in those states take care of these people.